You know what terrifies me as a surgeon? It's not the complicated operations or the emergency cases that come through my doors at 3 in the morning. What keeps me up at night is watching patient after patient come into my office, confident they're doing everything right for their bones, only to discover their skeleton has been silently crumbling for years. And here's the shocking part. Almost every single one of them was walking regularly. They thought they were protected. They weren't. I'm Dr. Sophia Reynolds, and I've spent over 2 decades as an orthopedic surgeon specializing in bone health and fracture prevention in older adults. In my career, I've performed thousands of surgeries on broken hips, shattered wrists, and compressed spines, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that the majority of these fractures were preventable. The problem is that most people over 75 believe that walking is enough to keep their bones strong. I'm here to tell you today that while walking is wonderful for many things, it is simply not sufficient to protect your skeletal system as you age. Before we dive into what you actually need to do to safeguard your bones, if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, I strongly recommend hitting that subscribe button and turning on the notification bell so you never miss another health tip designed specifically for you. And if you find this information helpful, please leave your comments, questions, and video suggestions below. I read every single one, and your feedback helps me create more content to help people just like you. Now let me tell you about something that happened in my practice just a few months ago that perfectly illustrates why I'm so passionate about this topic. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson came to see me. She was 78 years old, a retired school teacher from Portland, Oregon, who had been walking 3 miles every single day for the past 15 years. She was proud of her commitment to exercise. Her doctor had told her she was doing great. Her family admired her dedication. Then one morning, she bent down to pick up her newspaper from the front porch, and she felt something snap in her lower back. Eleanor didn't fall. She didn't trip. She simply bent over the way she had done 10,000 times before in her life. But this time, her vertebra collapsed. A compression fracture caused by bones that had become so weak they couldn't withstand the simple act of bending forward. When I reviewed her bone density scan, I was heartbroken. Her skeleton had the structural integrity of a woman in her 90s. And yet, she had been walking faithfully, believing she was doing everything right. This is the cruel irony that I see constantly. Walking is a low-impact activity. Your bones need impact. They need stress. They need to be challenged in specific ways that walking simply cannot provide, especially after the age of 75 when bone loss accelerates dramatically. Let me explain what actually happens inside your bones as you age, because understanding this will help you grasp why what I'm about to share is so critically important. Your bones are living tissue. They're constantly being broken down and rebuilt in a process called remodeling. When you're young, your body builds bone faster than it breaks it down. But after about age 35, the balance starts to shift. By the time you reach 75, you may be losing bone 3 to 5 times faster than your body can replace it. This is especially true for women after menopause, but men are absolutely not immune. Now here's where it gets interesting from a scientific standpoint. Your bones respond to mechanical stress through specialized cells called osteocytes. These cells are embedded throughout your bone tissue, and they act like sensors. When they detect force, pressure, or impact, they send signals that trigger bone building. The problem with walking is that it primarily loads your bones in one direction, with relatively low force. Your bones adapt to this stimulus quickly, and then they stop responding. It's like doing the same workout at the gym for 20 years. Eventually, your muscles stop growing because they've already adapted. If you're still watching and finding this information valuable, please take a moment to type a 1 in the comments below. It lets me know you're with me and helps this video reach more people who need to hear this message. So, what should you be doing instead of just walking? Let me share the specific strategies that I recommend to my patients, the ones that have the scientific backing to actually make a difference in bone strength. The first thing I tell every patient over 75 is that they need to incorporate resistance exercises into their routine. I'm not talking about becoming a bodybuilder. I'm talking about using your muscles against some form of resistance in a way that transfers force to your bones. This could be as simple as using resistance bands, light dumbbells, or even your own body weight. Mr. Thomas Hendricks was 81 when he first came to my practice in Denver, Colorado. He was a retired engineer who had always been analytically minded, and he wanted to understand exactly why his bones were becoming fragile despite his daily walks around his neighborhood. Thomas had already experienced 2 minor fractures, one in his wrist and one in his foot, from incidents that shouldn't have caused any injury at all. I explained to Thomas that his bones were essentially understimulated. They needed to feel the pull of muscles working against resistance to trigger the rebuilding process. We started him on a simple program, just 3 days a week, using light weights and resistance bands. He did seated rows, bicep curls, leg presses on a machine at his local senior center, and modified squats holding onto a chair. Nothing extreme, nothing dangerous, but absolutely transformative. After 18 months, Thomas's bone density scan showed improvement for the first time in over a decade. His wife Margaret told me he stood taller, moved with more confidence, and had stopped that slight shuffle in his walk that had worried her for years. The difference wasn't just in his bones, it was in his entire sense of self. The second critical element that walking cannot provide is what we call impact loading. Your bones need to feel the jolt of your feet hitting the ground with more force than a casual stroll provides. Now, I know what you're thinking. Dr. Reynolds, I'm 78 years old. I can't go jumping around, and you're right to be cautious. But there are safe ways to introduce impact loading that are appropriate for older adults. One technique I recommend is heel drops. You simply stand with your feet flat on the floor, rise up onto your toes, and then drop your heels back down firmly. Not jumping, just letting your heels hit the floor with a deliberate thump. This sends a signal through your leg bones all the way up to your spine. Research has shown that doing 40 to 50 of these heel drops daily can significantly improve bone density in the legs and lower spine. Mrs. Patricia Morales discovered this technique after coming to see me in Phoenix, Arizona. Patricia was 76, a former dance instructor who had been devastated when arthritis forced her to give up teaching. She felt like her body was betraying her. When I suggested heel drops, she was skeptical. It seemed too simple. But Patricia was diligent. She did her heel drops every morning while waiting for her coffee to brew and every evening while watching the news. 6 months later, Patricia told me something that brought tears to my eyes. She said that for the first time in years, she felt like she was doing something proactive for her body instead of just watching it decline. Her bone scan showed modest but meaningful improvement in her hip density, which is exactly where we most want to see gains, because hip fractures are the most devastating consequence of osteoporosis. The third element that I cannot stress enough is balance training. You might wonder what balance has to do with bone strength, and here's the connection. The strongest bones in the world won't help you if you fall and they shatter on impact. Falls are the primary cause of fractures in older adults, and balance deteriorates significantly after age 75 unless you actively work to maintain it. Mr. William Chen, 83 years old, came to me after a fall that resulted in a broken hip. William was a retired pharmacist from San Francisco who had always been meticulous about his health. He took his calcium supplements, got his vitamin D, walked regularly, and had regular checkups. But no one had ever told him that his balance was declining at a rate that made him increasingly vulnerable to falls. During his recovery, I asked William to stand on one foot with his eyes open. He could barely maintain his balance for 3 seconds. This is a man who had been walking daily, believing he was fit and healthy. His muscles were adequate for walking in a straight line, but the stabilizing muscles that prevent falls had atrophied from disuse. We incorporated balance exercises into William's rehabilitation. Simple things like standing on one foot while holding a counter, walking heel to toe in a straight line, and practicing shifting his weight from side to side. These exercises challenge the small muscles in your ankles, knees, and hips that act as your body's stability system. Within 3 months, William could stand on one foot for 30 seconds. More importantly, he regained confidence in his ability to navigate his own home without fear of falling. Now, I want to address something that many of my patients find surprising: the importance of protein for bone health. Most people associate bones with calcium, and yes, calcium matters. But your bones are actually about 50% protein by volume. The mineral part of bone, the calcium and phosphorus, is deposited onto a protein framework made primarily of collagen. Without adequate protein, your bones cannot rebuild properly no matter how much calcium you consume. Mrs. Dorothy Williams, 79 years old, was a perfect example of this. Dorothy was a retired nurse from Atlanta, Georgia, who knew more about health than most of my patients. She took her calcium supplements religiously. She got adequate vitamin D. But when I reviewed her dietary habits, I discovered she was eating very little protein. Like many older adults, her appetite had decreased, and she found it easier to eat toast, crackers, and simple carbohydrates than to prepare and consume adequate protein. Dorothy's bone density had been declining despite her calcium supplementation. When we increased her protein intake, adding eggs at breakfast, Greek yogurt as a snack, and ensuring she had fish or chicken at dinner, her next bone scan showed stabilization for the first time in years. The calcium finally had a framework to attach to. I recommend that adults over 75 consume approximately 1 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight daily. For a person weighing 150 pounds, that's about 68 grams of protein. It sounds like a lot, but spreading it across meals makes it manageable. An egg has 6 grams. A cup of Greek yogurt has 15. A palm-sized portion of chicken has about 25. The fifth factor that I see overlooked constantly is the role of vitamin D in bone health. Vitamin D is essential for calcium absorption. You could be taking all the calcium in the world, but without adequate vitamin D, your body cannot use it effectively. And here's the problem. As we age, our skin becomes less efficient at producing vitamin D from sunlight. Our kidneys become less effective at converting vitamin D to its active form. And many older adults spend less time outdoors than they did when they were younger. Mr. Robert Jackson, 77 years old from Seattle, Washington, had been taking calcium for years on his doctor's recommendation. But no one had checked his vitamin D level until he came to see me after a wrist fracture. His vitamin D was severely deficient, which explained why his bone density continued to decline despite all his efforts. We started him on vitamin D supplementation, monitored his levels, and within a year his calcium was finally being absorbed effectively. I also think about Mrs. Evelyn Crawford, 80 years old from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Evelyn was a retired nurse who had spent her career caring for others, often at the expense of her own health. She understood the importance of vitamin D intellectually, but like many healthcare professionals, she neglected her own needs. When Evelyn came to see me after her second vertebral fracture, her vitamin D level was one of the lowest I had ever seen. The winters in Minnesota meant months with minimal sun exposure, and Evelyn rarely took supplements because she was skeptical of taking anything that felt unnecessary. Her skepticism had cost her 2 broken vertebrae. What struck me about Evelyn's case was how quickly things improved once we addressed her deficiency. Within 6 months of proper supplementation, combined with the exercise program we designed together, her bone density scan showed improvement. Not just stabilization, but actual improvement. Evelyn told me that learning about the vitamin D connection had changed her entire perspective on supplementation. She now understood that certain supplements aren't optional luxuries. They're essential tools for maintaining health as we age. If you've made it this far into this video, I want you to know that you're exactly the kind of person who can turn their bone health around. You're taking the time to learn, to understand, and that investment in knowledge is the first step toward real change. Let me share something that might surprise you about the timing of exercise for bone health. Research suggests that shorter, more frequent sessions of bone-building activity may be more effective than longer, less frequent ones. Your osteocytes, those bone-sensing cells I mentioned earlier, become desensitized after prolonged activity. They respond best to novel stimuli, to changes in routine, to brief but intense signals. This is actually good news for older adults. Instead of trying to do a long exercise session that might be exhausting or overwhelming, you can break your bone-building activities into 2 or 3 10-minute sessions throughout the day. Do your resistance exercises in the morning. Do your heel drops in the afternoon. Do your balance work in the evening. Your bones will respond better to this approach than to a single long session. Mrs. Helen Martinez, 80 years old from San Diego, California, struggled with fatigue that made traditional exercise programs impossible. Helen was a retired accountant who had always been disciplined, but her energy levels had declined significantly in her 70s. When I suggested breaking her exercise into small chunks, she found she could manage much better. 10 minutes after breakfast, 10 minutes after lunch, 10 minutes after dinner. It didn't feel overwhelming, and she was consistent because it was sustainable. Helen's husband Carlos told me that watching his wife regain her strength and confidence was the best gift he could have received. They had been married for 54 years, and he had been terrified of losing her to a fall or fracture. Seeing her take control of her bone health gave them both hope for many more years together. The sixth critical element I want to address is the importance of posture exercises. As we age, we tend to develop a forward lean, a rounding of the upper back that puts enormous stress on the vertebrae. This postural change isn't just cosmetic. It increases the risk of vertebral compression fractures and makes falls more likely because it shifts your center of gravity forward. Mr. James O'Brien, 76 years old from Boston, Massachusetts, came to see me with chronic back pain that had been attributed to arthritis. James was a retired firefighter who had spent decades carrying heavy equipment and rescuing people from dangerous situations. His back had served him well for his career, but now it was curved forward, making him look older than he was and causing constant discomfort. When I examined James's spine, I found that he had several minor compression fractures that had gone undiagnosed. The forward curvature was both a cause and a consequence of these fractures. We started him on specific exercises to strengthen his back extensors, the muscles that help you stand up straight. We also worked on stretching his chest muscles, which had become tight from the forward posture. James was dedicated. He did his exercises daily, and over the course of a year, he gained nearly an inch in height from improved posture alone. His wife Margaret told me he walked differently, stood differently, even seemed to think differently. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who knew his body was getting stronger, not weaker. The seventh point I want to make is about the medications that can secretly steal your bone density. Many common medications have bone loss as a side effect, and older adults often take multiple medications without realizing the cumulative impact on their skeletal health. Proton pump inhibitors, the medications commonly used for acid reflux, can reduce calcium absorption significantly. Certain blood pressure medications affect bone metabolism. Long-term use of corticosteroids, even inhaled steroids for asthma or COPD, can accelerate bone loss. Some antidepressants have been linked to decreased bone density. Even some diabetes medications affect bone health. Mrs. Caroline Foster, 78 years old from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, was taking 7 different medications when she came to see me. Caroline was a retired librarian who had trusted her doctors implicitly. She assumed that if a medication was prescribed, it was necessary and safe. No one had ever discussed the impact of her medication combination on her bone health. When we reviewed her medications with her primary care physician, we found that 3 of them were potentially affecting her bones. We were able to substitute one medication with a bone-neutral alternative and adjust the dosing of another. Combined with her exercise program and nutritional changes, Caroline saw her first improvement in bone density in over 5 years. I want to be clear here. I'm not suggesting you stop taking any medication without consulting your doctor. What I'm suggesting is that you have a conversation with your healthcare provider about the bone health implications of every medication you take. Ask questions. Be your own advocate. The eighth element that deserves attention is sleep and its relationship to bone health. This might seem surprising, but research has shown that poor sleep quality is associated with lower bone density. During deep sleep, your body releases growth hormone, which plays a crucial role in bone formation and repair. Chronic sleep deprivation disrupts this process. Mr. Edward Kim, 82 years old from Los Angeles, California, had suffered from insomnia for over a decade. Edward was a retired professor who had spent his career studying literature, often reading late into the night. His sleep habits had carried over into retirement, and he rarely got more than 4 or 5 hours of sleep. When I examined his bone density, it was significantly worse than expected for his age and activity level. We worked with a sleep specialist to address Edward's insomnia. It wasn't easy. Decades of poor sleep habits don't change overnight. But with gradual adjustments to his sleep routine, reducing caffeine, establishing consistent bed and wake times, and creating a better sleep environment, Edward slowly improved his sleep quality. A year later, not only did he feel better and have more energy, but his bone density scan showed the decline had slowed significantly. Now, I want to talk about something that affects millions of older adults, but is rarely discussed in relation to bone health: social isolation. Studies have shown that people who are socially isolated have higher rates of bone loss and fractures. Part of this is behavioral. Isolated individuals tend to be less active, eat less well, and have less motivation to take care of themselves. But there also appears to be a biological component. Chronic loneliness activates stress pathways that accelerate bone breakdown. Mrs. Ruth Nakamura, 77 years old from Honolulu, Hawaii, lost her husband of 52 years and withdrew from social life almost entirely. Ruth had been a vibrant woman, active in her community and church, but grief consumed her. She stopped exercising, stopped eating properly, and rarely left her house. When her daughter finally convinced her to see me, Ruth had lost significant bone density in just 2 years. Recovery for Ruth wasn't just about exercise and nutrition, it was about rebuilding her life. We connected her with a senior exercise class where she made new friends. She started volunteering at a local school, helping children with reading. As her social engagement increased, so did her motivation to take care of her health. Her bone density stabilized, and more importantly, she found joy in living again. As we approach the end of our time together today, I want to leave you with a clear understanding of what you can do starting tomorrow to protect your bones. First, don't abandon walking. It's still excellent for your heart, your mood, your circulation, and your overall health, but recognize that it's not enough by itself to protect your bones. Second, add resistance training at least 2 to 3 times per week. Start light. Use resistance bands if weights feel intimidating. Work with a physical therapist if you need guidance. The key is consistency, not intensity. Third, incorporate impact loading through heel drops or other safe impact activities. Aim for 40 to 50 repetitions daily. It takes less than 2 minutes and can make a significant difference over time. Fourth, practice balance exercises daily. Stand on one foot while holding a counter. Walk heel to toe. Challenge your stability in safe ways. Fall prevention is bone protection. Fifth, ensure you're getting adequate protein, approximately 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. Spread it across meals. Make it a priority. Sixth, check your vitamin D levels and supplement if necessary. Most older adults need supplementation, especially those in northern climates or who spend limited time outdoors. Seventh, review your medications with your doctor and ask about bone health implications. Be your own advocate. Eighth, prioritize sleep. Your bones need rest to rebuild. Ninth, stay socially connected. Your emotional health and your bone health are more intertwined than you might imagine. I have seen countless patients transform their bone health by implementing these strategies. Age is not destiny. A diagnosis of low bone density is not a sentence. Your bones are living tissue, capable of responding to the right signals at any age. Will you build as much bone as you did at 30? No. But can you slow the loss, stabilize your density, and dramatically reduce your fracture risk? Absolutely. Every day that you take action is a day you're investing in your future mobility, independence, and quality of life. Mrs. Patterson, the school teacher from Portland who broke her spine picking up a newspaper, she's doing well now. She does her exercises faithfully. She tells me she wishes someone had told her 20 years ago what she knows now, but she doesn't dwell on that. She focuses on what she can control today. That's the message I want you to take from this video. You cannot change the past. You cannot undo years of bone loss overnight. But you can start today, right now, making choices that protect your skeleton for whatever years you have ahead. Talk to your doctor. Get a bone density scan if you haven't had one. Start small with exercise if you need to. But start. Your bones have carried you through your entire life. They've supported every step, every embrace, every moment of standing tall. Now it's time to support them in return. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If this information has been helpful, please share it with someone you love who might benefit. And leave me a comment letting me know what topic you'd like me to cover next. I'm here because of you, and I'm committed to continuing this journey together. Take care of yourselves. Be kind to your bodies, and I'll see you in the next video.